It wasn't announced on television. It wasn't debated in public. It was signed quietly while everyone was distracted, and it just changed who really owns strategic metals in America. Most people never saw it coming, and that was the point. Tucked deep inside a massive climate package, thousands of pages long, was a short section almost nobody read. It didn't make headlines. It didn't trend on social media. It passed quietly in the early hours of the morning, when attention was elsewhere and fatigue did the rest of the work. By the time the public woke up, the framework was already law, not proposed, not debated, signed. On the surface, it looked like another routine environmental provision, just more language about sustainability, supply chains, and energy security. But beneath the bureaucratic phrasing sat something far more consequential, a legal mechanism that fundamentally alters the relationship between private ownership and the state. Not in the future, not someday. Now, if you checked your usual financial news sources and saw nothing unusual, you weren't alone. If your broker didn't call, if your favorite analyst stayed silent, that silence isn't proof that nothing happened. It's proof of how effectively it was concealed. Because what was authorized isn't speculative, and it isn't theoretical. It's written into federal law, published in official government channels, and quietly acknowledged by people inside the precious metals industry who are unwilling to attach their names to the warning. The authorization grants federal agencies the power to identify, regulate, and, under specific conditions, acquire private holdings of materials deemed essential to the energy transition. That includes silver, platinum, and palladium. In plain language, the government has given itself the legal right to inventory your holdings, and, if it decides the situation warrants it, take possession of them while setting the price it believes is fair. This is not about rumors or hidden executive orders. The language exists. It's specific. It's enforceable. And it closely mirrors a historical precedent that many people assume could never be repeated. Nearly a century ago, during a period of financial chaos, Americans were told that extraordinary measures were necessary to stabilize the nation. Private ownership of gold was declared illegal. Citizens were ordered to turn in their coins and bars at a fixed price, under threat of fines and imprisonment. The justification was national emergency. The promise was that the policy was temporary. It lasted decades. What followed is rarely emphasized in textbooks. Once the gold was collected, the government revalued it higher. Overnight, citizens who complied lost purchasing power, while the state captured the upside. Those who understood the system early and structured their holdings differently preserved, and in some cases multiplied, their wealth. The playbook worked once. It's now being updated. This time, the approach is quieter. There is no dramatic announcement, no single executive order designed to shock the public. Instead, the strategy unfolds in stages. First comes the legal authority. That step is already complete. Next comes the data. And then, when conditions are right, comes the justification. Many people assume they're invisible. They believe that because they bought metals with cash, or because their holdings sit quietly in a safe, there's no way for anyone to know. That assumption is outdated. Over the last several years, a complex web of reporting requirements, financial surveillance, and digital tracking has made anonymity far more fragile than most realize. Large purchases from bullion dealers trigger mandatory reporting. Bank wires to well-known metals retailers are flagged under existing anti-money laundering rules. Safe deposit boxes are logged and categorized. Imports are recorded at borders. Even online behavior, searches, video views, ad clicks, feeds into metadata profiles that don't require warrants to collect. Add to that the rise of tokenized metals and blockchain-based platforms, where balances are publicly visible in real time and the picture becomes clear. The infrastructure to identify ownership already exists. The databases are built. The cross-referencing systems are active. Until recently, what was missing was the authority to act on that information. That gap has now been closed. So why hasn't anything happened yet? Because enforcement requires context. In the past, major confiscatory actions have always been preceded by crisis. Fear creates compliance. Without it, resistance is too costly. The scenario being modeled now isn't a banking collapse or a currency panic. It's an energy emergency. Imagine a near-future summer marked by extreme heat, power grids under stress, renewable infrastructure failing to meet demand, manufacturing bottlenecks blamed for shortages, public frustration escalating as outages spread. Behind the scenes, reports circulate identifying a critical constraint: insufficient supply of key industrial metals. A narrative begins to form. Private stockpiles are framed not as prudent savings, but as obstacles to progress. Hoarding becomes a moral failure. Speculation is blamed for suffering. At that point, the request begins politely. Voluntary reporting, appeals to civic duty, promises of fair compensation. Many comply immediately, convinced it's temporary and necessary. Then the penalties are announced. Fines for non-reporting. Criminal consequences for refusal. The choice becomes compliance or confrontation. History suggests most people choose compliance. That doesn't mean the outcome is inevitable. It means the timeline matters. Actions taken after a declared emergency are limited and risky. Actions taken before are legal, strategic, and often invisible. There are lawful ways to reduce exposure. One involves classification. Not all metals are treated equally under the law. Items held for historical, cultural, or numismatic purposes are often exempt from bulk reporting requirements. That distinction mattered in the past, and it still matters now. Transforming generic bullion into recognized collectibles doesn't change the metal itself, but it changes how it's viewed legally. Enforcement agencies tend to pursue the largest, simplest targets, not assets that require subjective evaluation. Another strategy involves jurisdiction. Assets stored outside the country fall under different legal regimes. While foreign holdings must be disclosed, disclosure is not the same as surrender. International legal processes are slow, complex, and uncertain. Time in this context is protection. Then there's the issue of scope. Not every metal is included. Some materials are targeted because of their industrial role in renewable technologies. Others are conspicuously absent. That absence isn't accidental. Including certain assets would raise questions policymakers would rather avoid, questions about money, value, and the stability of the financial system itself. Where something is excluded, opportunity exists. None of these approaches require breaking the law. They require understanding it. The people who fare best during periods of systemic stress are rarely the loudest or the most defiant. They're the ones who adapt early, document carefully, and avoid becoming easy targets. Some argue that constitutional protections make large-scale seizures impossible. In theory, property cannot be taken without due process and just compensation. In practice, legal challenges take years. During that time, assets are frozen, markets seize up, and individuals bear the burden of uncertainty. Winning eventually is not the same as being protected now. Based on patterns already visible, the coming months represent a quiet window. No enforcement, no public messaging, just preparation. That window will not stay open indefinitely. Once voluntary surveys begin circulating under the guise of planning or research, the tone will shift. Participation will be encouraged, then expected, then enforced. When the trigger event arrives, whatever form it takes, the pace will accelerate, markets will lock, liquidity will vanish, premiums will spike. Those still holding exposed assets will find themselves unable to sell, unable to move, and unable to wait it out. Zooming out, this isn't only about metals or energy. It's about a broader shift in how ownership is defined. Property increasingly comes with conditions. You may own something until it's needed. You may keep it until priorities change. The language is always the same necessity: fairness, collective good. A century ago, people lacked information and alternatives. Today, awareness spreads faster. That changes the calculus. Policies that rely on silence and ignorance are fragile once exposed. The more people understand the structure ahead of time, the harder it becomes to implement quietly. This moment is less about fear and more about clarity. Knowing where the lines are being drawn allows you to stand on the right side of them. Doing nothing is still a decision, just not an active one. The practical steps are straightforward. Know what you hold. Know where it's stored. Know how it was acquired. Decide whether its current form makes it visible or vulnerable. Adjust while adjustment is easy. Keep records. Reduce digital footprints where legal. And share information with people you trust. None of this guarantees a specific outcome. Policy paths can change. Public pushback can alter decisions. But preparedness shifts odds in your favor. Waiting for certainty usually means waiting too long. Periods like this are remembered in hindsight as turning points. Moments when rules changed quietly and consequences followed later. The people who adapted early are rarely the ones telling the stories, but they're the ones who still have options. The framework is in place. The data exists. The justification is being prepared. What happens next depends less on what's written in legislation and more on how many people see it before it's tested. This is not a call to panic. It's a reminder that ownership is strongest when it's understood, structured, and defended before it's questioned. The window is open now. Use it deliberately.